Hello there, dear listeners. Welcome to part 10 of my Project 2025 reading. I'm on page 137 of this 920-page PDF. The next section is titled DoD Intelligence. And as usual, I'm not going to do much editing on this, so you're probably going to hear some mouth noises, mistakes, or weird breaths. Here we go. Our national defense establishment must evolve to meet the rapid, profound, and dynamic change in the global landscape, but absent significant effort to evaluate and retool in critical areas, including our intelligence and security portfolios, America's competitive advantage against rivals and adversaries is at serious risk. However, for any structural changes to succeed, the crisis in our intelligence community, IC, Defense Intelligence Enterprise, DIE, leadership, must be addressed. The DIE accounts for the bulk of the intelligence community's personnel and a significant portion of its budget. Of the IC's 17 elements, 8 are within DoD, 2 are independent, and 7 belong to various other departments and agencies. Overall, the DoD provides 86% of the personnel who conduct intelligence activities, both military and civilian. The Defense Intelligence Enterprise must deliver accurate, unbiased, and timely insights consistently and with clarity, objectivity, and independence. If they continue on their current path, however, both the DIE and the intelligence community writ large will continue to provide inaccurate and politicized intelligence assessments that mislead policymakers. Needed reforms. Improve the intelligence process. Defense intelligence assets have been committed to the prosecution of operational campaigns since September 11, 2001, at the expense of our strategic objectives, and this has led to increased risk. Further, the DIE has evolved into a customer-based model, with the DIE IC trying to be supportive of policy direction at the expense of analytical integrity. The result has been a significant politicization of intelligence. 1. Establish unbiased intelligence reporting from DIE/IC senior leaders. As the leader of the DIE, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security should provide a top-line, dissenting, or clarifying view of DIE and IC assessments as needed. 2. Align collection and analysis with vital national interests, countering China and Russia. 3. Establish an effective global federated intelligence framework with allies and partners and our combatant commands. Avoid the temptation to neglect areas that appear less pertinent but that support a convergence of threats and the critical requirements to sustain those threats. 4. Establish and sustain feedback loops to provide insight and direction for continuous improvement and accountability. We must revisit our assessments and understand where we got it right and where we got it wrong. 5. Better exploit publicly available information, PAI data, and foster innovation to improve collection and analysis. We must end the practice of multiple DIE organizations paying to acquire the same PAI data and invest more in machine learning, ML, and artificial intelligence, AI, to exploit open source and classified intelligence data. 6. Remove policy obstacles that impede available technical solutions and tailored approaches in order to preclude corruption at the point of collection. 7. Develop statistical discrimination techniques based on relative value to deal with the volume and velocity of available data and information, which are rapidly exceeding our ability to exploit and analyze available data and information efficiently. Expand the integration of intelligence activities. The prevalence of asymmetric warfare requires defense intelligence to leverage the unique authorities and capabilities of U.S. departments and agencies, as well as our partners and allies, to competitive advantage. 1. Create an improved cyber defense and capability. We must reevaluate the dual hat structure between the National Security Agency, NSA, and U.S. Cyber Command, U.S. Cybercom. 2. Resurrect economic analysis capability to improve our ability to counter Chinese whole-of-government strategies that combine security with predatory economic objectives. 3. resurrect critical thinking to provide true strategic intelligence that will enable the U.S. to counter global adversaries and emerging technologies, such as adversary advances in hypersonics, unmanned aerial systems, UAS, cyber domain, advanced fighter aircraft, and advanced undersea capabilities more effectively. 4. Rebuild human intelligence, HumInt, and counterintelligence, CI, and improve their integration with defensive and offensive cyber operations. 5. Establish true alignment between DoD and DHS, both to improve the defense of critical U.S. infrastructure and national border integrity, and to develop vital information that enables defense against foreign targeted disruptions. Restore accountability and public trust. In recent years, public trust in defense intelligence has been eroded by, for example, flawed assumptions leading up to our Afghanistan withdrawal, flawed Russia-Ukraine assessments, divergences in relations with key Gulf allies, and voids being filled by Russia and China around the world. For trust to be restored and sustained, officials must be held accountable. 1. Restore DIE critical thinking. Establish mechanisms to restore analytic integrity and return to true intelligence-driven operations. The next administration should eliminate the conflict of interest in the current customer-based model, in which the customer is always right, by enforcing time-tested procedures that guarantee independent analysis, even if it means challenging policymakers' assumptions. The Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security's leadership role should be expanded to include providing analytic, top-line views and improve DIE transparency by highlighting diverging views. 2. Elevate the DIE's voice in national policy discussions, commensurate with the DIE's 75% share of the IC budget. Present defense intelligence to senior policymakers either independently to avoid all-source bias or in consensus products like the National Intelligence Estimates. Eliminate peripheral intelligence obligations that do not advance military readiness. In 2019, following the catastrophic 2015 data breach at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, OPM, the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, DCSA, accepted transfer of the responsibility to conduct security clearance and suitability investigations for 95% of the U.S. government's civilian workforce. This decision, which grew out of an intention to deconstruct OPM, was wrong-headed on many levels and made the federal bureaucracy dependent on a new overlay of DoD bureaucracy, in a sense instilling DoD control of civilian managers. This function should be returned to OPM, except for military security clearance investigations. U.S. Army. The U.S. Army's mission is to deploy, fight, and win our nation's wars by providing ready, prompt, and sustained land dominance by Army forces across the full spectrum of conflict as part of the joint force. Today, however, the Army cannot execute its land dominance mission. The U.S. Army is at an inflection point that is marked by more than a decade of steadily eroding budgets and diluted buying power, an appreciable degradation in readiness and training capacity, a near crisis in the recruiting and retention of critical personnel, and a bevy of aging weapons systems that no longer provide the qualitative edge over peer and near-peer competitors, but will not be replaced in the near term. All of these challenges are set against the backdrop of a complex and dynamic global geopolitical environment that is exemplified by and exacerbated by the triumph of our adversaries in Afghanistan after a 20-year struggle there, as well as recent Russian outrages in the Ukraine, and China's bellicosity, both on its borders and in surrounding disputed regions. In spite of these ever-increasing operational pulls, our Army is consistently being asked to do more with fewer resources. The status quo is further marked by a pervasive politically driven top-down focus on progressive social policies that emphasize matters like so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, and climate change, often to the detriment of the Army's core war-fighting mission. Needed reforms. Rebuild the Army. The total Army budget has decreased by roughly 11% since 2018, perilously affecting the service's readiness and ability to train and to procure new personnel and equipment. Declining budgets and decreased buying power have forced the Army to lower training standards and opportunities to train, propose reductions in end strength, slash military construction programs to historically low levels, and scale back essential modernization programs. 1. Increase the Army budget to remain the world's preeminent land power. 2. Accelerate the development and procurement of the 6 current Army modernization priorities: long-range precision fires, the next-generation combat vehicle, future vertical lift, the Army network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality, to replace worn-out and outdated combat systems and ensure ground combat dominance. 3. Increase funding to improve Army training and operational readiness. 4. Increase the Army force structure by 50,000 to handle 2 major regional contingencies simultaneously. 5. Reform recruiting efforts. The Army missed its 2022 recruitment goal by 25%, or 15,000 soldiers. Focus on deployability and sustained operations. The U.S. Army's very lethal ground force capability is irrelevant if it cannot quickly deploy to locations for employment in decisive operations to secure our global security interests. Additionally, Army logisticians provide the ground transportation of both personnel and equipment, fuel, food, and water, munitions, bombs and bullets, medical supplies and services, and veterinary services, food safety, that are critical to sustainment of the other services. 1. Immediately increase the production and stockpiling of critical munitions and repair parts. 2. Prioritize expeditionary logistics in all force design and operational planning to guarantee entry into a contested theater of war. 3. Increase the level of joint force training, synchronization, and coordination focused on logistics. 4. Prepare to deploy forces from degraded U.S.-based transportation infrastructure that is compromised by opposing forces. Transform Army culture and training. The Army can no longer serve as the nation's social testing ground. A rebuilt Army that is focused again on its core warfighting mission and empowered it with the tools, resources, and authorities it needs to accomplish that mission must be the next administration's highest defense priority. 1. Stop using the Army as a test bed for social evolution. Misusing the Army in this way detracts from its core purpose while doing little to reshape the American social structure. The Army no longer reflects national demographics to the degree that it did before 1974, when the draft was eliminated. 2. Demand accountability in senior leaders to reverse the decline in public support for military service. 3. Re-establish the experiential base for the planning, execution, and leadership of Army formations in large-scale operations. I'd love to ask Donald Trump to define the word experiential. Currently, there are no general or field-grade officers who served as planners or commanders against a near-peer adversary in combat. 4. Examine the logic of emerging Army concepts about employing massed long-range fires and effects without considering how to gain advantage by closing with and dominating an adversary on land. 5. Recognize that high-intensity land combat operations cannot be sustained through short-term individual or unit rotations in the style of the sustained low-intensity campaigns conducted over the past 20 years. 6. Transform how the National Guard is employed during extended operations short of declared war to preclude back-to-back federal and state deployments of National Guard soldiers in order to stabilize and preserve military volunteerism in our communities. 7. Revamp Army school curricula to concentrate on preparation for large-scale land operations that focus on defeating a peer threat. 8. Address the underlying casual issues driving increasing Army suicide rates, which have surpassed pre-World War II rates and are now eclipsing the rate among civilians. U.S. Navy. As noted at the beginning of this chapter, the U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to provide and maintain a Navy. Inherent in this phrase is a recognition that there is a vital national interest in the maritime environment, and that this national interest requires sustained planning and investment. This is as true today as it was almost 250 years ago, and will remain true into the future. The U.S. Navy, USN, exists for 2 primary reasons: to project prompt, sustained, and effective combat power globally, both at sea and ashore, and to deter aggression by potential adversaries by maintaining a forward operating presence in conjunction with allies and partners. Today, the People's Republic of China People's Liberation Army Navy plan can challenge the USN's ability to accomplish its mission in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. In the production, employment, and control of maritime forces, the USN must consider the scope and rate of technological change and, where appropriate, adapt its processes and workforce development. In balancing the necessary long-term industrial model of naval platforms against emerging short-term opportunities, the USN must take account of advances that may present vulnerabilities and risks, as well as what is assured and secure. Needed reforms. Invest in and expand force structure. The USN's organizing principle remains platform-centered, vessels manned by sailors. The manned surface and subsurface forces act in concert with land-based, air-based, and space-based forces to project power outside sovereign territory, principally by operating in international waters. Investments must be closely coordinated with these other elements of military power. 1. Build a fleet of more than 355 ships. 2. Develop and field unmanned systems to augment the manned forces. 3. Require that range and lethality be the key factors in all procurement and sustainment decisions for ships, aircraft, and munitions. Re-establish the General Board. In contrast with the Navy General Board that served ship deployment so well during the interwar period, the current joint process for defining the requirements for major defense acquisitions is not well suited to long-term planning of the sort that is needed for USN fleet architecture and shipbuilding. The Interwar General Board should serve as a model, empowered with final decision authority over all requirements documents concerning ships and the major defense systems fielded on ships. The individual board members would ensure a broad base of knowledge as well as independent thinking. Establish a Rapid Capabilities Office. The USN must transition technology into warfighting capability more rapidly. It must foster a culture of innovation that includes connecting theoretical and intangible ideas with real production environments that produce tangible and practical outcomes, and adapting proven processes to advance material solutions. 1. Harness innovation and willingness to tolerate risk so that good enough systems can be fielded rapidly. 2. Use the Space Development Agency as a model. 3. Establish an oversight board of directors made up of the Service Chief, Service Secretary, and Undersecretary of Defense for acquisition and sustainment. Accelerate the purchase of key munitions. It takes years to build and maintain navies, but only hours to expend their ordnance in combat. The USN must be prepared to expend large quantities of air-launched and sea-launched stealthy, precision cruise missiles against targets both at sea and ashore. Additionally, modern air defense requires the use of high-performance surface-to-air missiles. 1. Produce key munitions at the maximum rate with significant capacity. 2. Working with the Congress, employ the widest possible range of techniques to enhance the munition supply chains and workforce. Enhance warfighter development. The USN requires a variety of documented qualifications for personnel to advance in their careers and assume leadership positions. It also requires individual professional qualifications that are focused on warfighting. 1. Mandate qualifications that demonstrate an understanding of core competence in collective, integrated warfighting, especially based on current plans and technologies. 2. Elevate the headquarters staff focused on warfighter development, N7, within the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, OPNAV, and empower it to develop such requirements. I love how they cram in the acronyms when they're not even referenced again later in the paragraph. It's so funny to me. 3. Require that war games be utilized as experiential learning environments for their participants as a prerequisite for achieving career milestones, department heads, commanding officers, and major commanders. 4. Highlight in training and leader development that USN forces can and must maintain the ability to operate from and/or defend sovereign territory to include our allies and partners. 5. Train to balance effects from kinetic to non-kinetic and from lethal to non-lethal through effective command and control. U.S. Air Force. The U.S. Air Force today, no USAF? The U.S. Air Force today lacks a force structure with the lethality, survivability, and capacity to fight a major conflict with a great power like China, deter nuclear threats, and meet its other operational requirements under the National Defense Strategy. For 30 years, the Air Force has received less annual funding, if pass-through funding, defined as money in the Air Force budget that does not have to go to the Air Force, is removed from the equation, than the Army and Navy have received. This underfunding has forced the Air Force to cut its forces and forego modernizing aging weapon systems that were never designed to operate in current threat environments and are structurally and mechanically exhausted. The result is an Air Force that is the oldest, smallest, and least ready in its history. The decline in Air Force capacity and capability is occurring at the same time the security environment demands the very options that the Air Force uniquely provides. Combatant commanders routinely request more Air Force capabilities than the service has the capacity to provide. The Air Force today simply cannot accomplish all the missions it is required to perform. The Air Force has consistently stated on the official record that it is not sized to meet the mission demands placed on it by the various U.S. combatant commands. A 2018 study, The Air Force We Need, showed a 24% deficit in Air Force capacity to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. Those conclusions remain valid and are more pronounced today because of subsequent aircraft retirements. The demand is also higher because of world events. To understand these trends, one needs only to consider that the Air Force's future 5-year budget plan retires 1,463 aircraft while buying just 467. This makes for a reduction of 996 aircraft by 2027. The net result is a force that is smaller, older, and less ready at a time when demand is burgeoning. Needed reforms. Increase spending and budget accuracy in line with a threat-based strategy. Returning the U.S. military to a force that can achieve deterrence or win in a fight if necessary requires returning to a threat-based defense strategy. Real budget growth combined with a more equitable distribution of resources across the armed services is the only realistic way to create a modernized Air Force with the capacity to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. Additionally, as noted above, pass-through funding causes numbers cited in current DoD budget documents to be higher than the dollar amounts actually received by the Air Force. 1. Adopt a two-war force defense strategy with scenarios for each service that will allow the Air Force to attain the resources it requires by developing a force sizing construct that reflects what is required to accomplish strategic objectives. 2. Eliminate pass-through funding, which has grown to more than $40 billion per year and has caused the Air Force to be chronically underfunded for decades. 3. Increase the Air Force budget by 5% annually after adjusting for inflation to reverse the decline in size, age, and readiness and facilitate the transition to a more modern, lethal, and survivable force. Reduce near-term and mid-term risk. Increasing the Air Force's acquisition of next-generation capabilities that either are or soon will be in production will increase the ability of the United States to deter or defeat near-term to mid-term threats. 1. Increase F-35A procurement to 60 to 80 per year. 2. Build the capacity for a B-21 production rate of 15 to 18 aircraft per year, along with applicable elements of the B-21 long-range strike family of systems. 3. Increase Air Force airlift and aerial refueling capacity to support agile combat employment operations that generate combat sorties from a highly dispersed posture in both Europe and the Pacific. 4. Develop and buy larger quantities of advanced mid-range weapons, 50 nanometers to 200 nanometers, that are sized to maximize targets per sortie for stealth aircraft flying in contested environments against target sets that could exceed 100,000 aim points. 5. Accelerate the development and production of the Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missile to reduce the risk inherent in an aging Minuteman III force in light of China's nuclear modernization breakout. 6. Increase the number of EC-37B electronic warfare aircraft from 10 to 20 in order to achieve a minimum capacity to engage growing threats from China across the electromagnetic spectrum. Invest in future Air Force programs and efforts. Increasingly capable adversaries require new capabilities to enable victory against those adversaries. 1. Attain an operationally optimized advanced battle management system as the Air Force element of the DoD Joint All-Domain Command and Control Enterprise. 2. Produce the next generation air dominant system of systems: air moving target indication, other sensors, communications, command and control, weapons, and uninhabited aerial vehicles. 3. Achieve moving target engagement capability and capacity against sea, surface, and ground mobile targets at the scale necessary to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. 4. Build resilient basing, sustainment, and communications for survivability in a contested environment. 5. Establish a vigorous and sufficiently funded electromagnetic spectrum operations recovery plan to make up for more than 20 years of neglect of this mission area. U.S. Marine Corps. The U.S. Marine Corps, USMC, see they got an acronym, is the maritime land force of the Department of Defense and Department of the Navy. It serves a critical role as an expeditionary amphibious force that can project power from sea to shore and beyond while performing other specialized missions like securing America's diplomatic outposts abroad. Between the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and the conclusions of U.S. military operations in Afghanistan in August 2022, the Marine Corps engaged in extended operations ashore as directed by the Secretary of Defense, leaving it with little opportunity or ability to train for and execute the naval and amphibious operations for which it is uniquely suited and directed by law. This lengthy divergence from its primary mission led to deep concern that the Corps had become a second land army, prompting senior Marine Corps leaders to push for the service to return to the sea. In addition, the USMC spent nearly 2 decades fighting counterinsurgency wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and developed capabilities that were specifically geared to those fights, but have limited unity in scenarios involving evenly matched and advanced enemies or amphibious operations that are necessary for the projection of naval power. As a result, Marine Corps Commandant General David H. Berger developed and began to implement Force Design 2030, a plan that, if completed, would be the most radical transformation of the Marine Corps since World War II. The successful implementation of this force redesign, coupled with reforms in the Marine Corps' personnel system and the Navy's amphibious shipbuilding plans, will be critical to ensuring the Corps' future combat effectiveness. Needed reforms. Divest systems to implement the Force Design 2030 transformation. Divesting equipment that is less relevant to the distributed, low-signature operations in a contested maritime environment will make funds available for modernization. 1. Transform USMC force structure. A. Eliminate all USMC law enforcement battalions. B. Transform at least one Marine Infantry Regiment into a Marine Littoral Regiment. C. Reduce the size of remaining infantry battalions. 2. Divest systems or equipment that are better suited to heavier U.S. Army units. A. Maintain divestment of M1 Abrams tanks. B. Eliminate the majority of tube artillery batteries, M777. C. Reduce the number of advanced amphibious assault vehicles and the number of their replacements. 3. Use funds made available by divestment of systems to support new systems that are geared to the likely needs of future conflicts. A. Increase the number of rocket artillery batteries, also known as HIMARS. B. Increase the number of upgraded light armor vehicle companies, LAVs. C. Increase the number of unmanned aerial systems and anti-air systems, including counter-UAS systems. D. Develop long-range strike missiles and anti-ship missiles for the Corps. E. Modernize USMC infantry equipment. Transform the USMC personnel paradigm. More than other services, the USMC relies heavily on junior non-commissioned officers, NCOs, to staff key positions across the force, but especially in combat arms. For example, E4s routinely hold squad leader billets when the Army normally has E6s in those billets. The nature of more distributed operations and the increasingly complex responsibilities of a Marine Corps rifle squad and platoon under Force Design 2030 will only put more responsibility on the backs of squad leaders and platoon sergeants, increasing the need for more senior Marines in those critical positions. Additionally, the Corps needs to improve its retention of junior NCOs after their first enlistments. The Marines have much lower rates of re-enlistment than other branches. 1. Align the USMC's combat arms rank structure with the U.S. Army's, Squad leader billets are for E6s, and platoon sergeant billets are for E7s. 2. Create better incentives to retain talented junior NCOs, especially in infantry and other critical military occupational specialties. 3. Reduce unnecessary deployments to increase dwell time in order to enable more robust primary military education. Align Navy amphibious shipbuilding with Force Design 2030. The U.S. Navy has struggled for decades to maintain an amphibious fleet that could support USMC warplanes around large-scale amphibious operations. In addition, amphibious shipbuilding has often had to compete against other priorities within a constrained budget and limited shipbuilding capacity. 1. Develop and produce light amphibious warships, LAWs, to support more distributed amphibious operations, especially in the Pacific. 2. Maintain between 28 and 31 larger amphibious warships, as opposed to the 25 specified in current Navy shipbuilding plans, and the 38 specified before 2020. U.S. Space Force. U.S. Space Forces conduct global space operations to sustain and enhance air, land, and sea effectiveness, lethality, and superiority by providing secure broadband global communications, precision position, navigation, and timing accuracy, attack warning and threat tracking and targeting capability, real-time intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance information, and their assured continuity of operations both by defending U.S. assets and by conducting offensive operations that are capable of imposing unacceptable losses on adversaries that might seek to attack them. The U.S. Space Force, USSF, was established to assure continuous global and theater combat support from space, to deter attacks against U.S. space assets, and to prevail in space should deterrence fail. The USSF posture was conceived as a balance of offensive and defensive deterrent capabilities designed for maximum effectiveness. Needed reforms. Reverse the Biden administration's defensive posture. The Biden administration has eliminated almost all offensive deterrence capabilities and instead will rely solely on the defensive capabilities of disaggregation, maneuver, and reconstitution, the most costly, the slowest, and ultimately the most fragile architecture selection. 1. Re-establish offensive capabilities to guarantee a favorable balance of forces, efficiently manage the full deterrent spectrum, and seriously complicate enemy calculations of a successful first strike against U.S. space assets. 2. Restore architectural balance in U.S. Space Forces, both offensive and defensive, to restore deterrence dominance efficiently and quickly. 3. Rapidly expand space control capability to include cislunar space, the region beginning at geosynchronous altitude and encompassing the Moon, to provide early warning of an enemy attack. 4. Seek arms control and rules of the road understandings only when they are unambiguously in the interest of the U.S. and its allies, and prohibit their unilateral implementation. Reduce overclassification. The USSF must move beyond the Cold War-era culture of secrecy and overclassification that surrounded military space to facilitate greater coordination and synchronization of efforts across the government and commercial sectors. Declassify appropriate information about terrestrial and on-orbit space capabilities that threaten the U.S. space constellation, as well as those being pursued by our competitors, to secure the principled right to counter them offensively. Implement policies suited to a more mature USSF. No longer a newborn, the USSF has entered its 4th year of existence, and the lessons learned can be incorporated across all facets of the force to increase its effectiveness. 1. Restructure from the current unity of effort structure to unity of command. 2. Lead the U.S. government's development of a clear and unambiguous declaratory policy that the United States will operate at will in space and enforce these operations with capabilities that ensure effective deterrence and the ability to impose our will if necessary. 3. End the current study phase of concept development and issue necessary guidance for the development and fielding of offensive capabilities. 4. Alter the Space Development Agency's current fail-only approach and transition to a methodology that maintains aggressive timelines but with significantly greater engineering rigor, with special attention to sustainment, support, and fully integrated space operations. 5. Increase the number of general officer positions to ensure the Space Force's ability to compete for resources on a common basis with the other services. 6. Explore creation of a Space Force Academy to attract top aero-astro students, engineers, and scientists, and develop astronauts. The Academy could be attached initially to a large existing research university like the California Institute of Technology, or MIT, share faculty and funding, and eventually be built separately to be on par with the other service academies. Alright, I'm going to stop there for now. We're on page 151 of this 920-page PDF document. The next section looks pretty lengthy. It's called U.S. Cyber Command. Conservatives always want to build up the military. What's conservative about wanting more military? There's a joke in there somewhere. I'm just not in the mood to find it. This recording and all other recordings related to this Project 2025 reading are copyrighted by Douglas Wayne Ricketts. All rights reserved. Unless you agree with me that Project 2025 sucks, then please feel free to use as much of this reading as you want. Thanks for listening.